Welcome to the AVS Professional Development Session on Skills and Strategies for Navigating Difficult Conversations and Negotiations. The session will be led today by Dr. Lily Wong, who is the director of the Durham School of Architectural Engineering and Construction, College of Engineering at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Her primary research interests are in room acoustics and noise control. Recent work has focused on linking building acoustic conditions to human perception and performance, particularly in office, classroom, and home environments. She is also a professional engineer licensed in acoustics through the state of Oregon. She is a fellow of the Acoustical Society of America, where she has served in a variety of leadership and officer roles, and she is also active in multiple organizations. Dr. Wong has undergone significant training in career development, leadership, negotiations, and inclusion, and leads sessions on these topics for UNL faculty, Big Ten Women's Workshops, ASA career development sessions, and more. We are delighted to have her present this session today on such an important topic. The format will be a lecture with some interaction, such as online live polls and a skills worksheet, which should have been completed in advance. Please make sure that you have an internet-enabled device on hand for today's session. Lily, if you're ready, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Angela. And thanks to all of you for joining today. And we're just 1 minute past the hour. And so I think there will still be some people joining. And I'm going to set my timer so I can make sure that I keep to our hour. I am very excited to be here today to talk to you about this topic, which is near and dear to my heart. Skills and strategies for navigating difficult conversations and negotiations. And I was pleased that many of you submitted questions through the registration form, and I'm hoping that I'll touch on some of those throughout the session. And as other questions come up, as Angela said, feel free to put those into the chat, and I'll try to address them either at the moment or towards the end or in the Q&A box. So let's start with an interactive item. So if you have an internet-enabled device, it can, if you happen to be on a computer or a laptop, you can use that device. Or if you have a mobile device, a phone, an iPad, something like that, please have that on hand. And we're going to go to this website. So you're going to go to menti.com and enter this code. We will paste that into the chat also right now. You can also use the link that I just sent in the chat directly if you don't want to post the code in. But we're going to do some interactive questions throughout the webinar today. So if you will log on to that, and I am going to switch over to my Menti page. I thought I'd just start because this is a topic of great interest to everyone. I'm really glad that you're here to learn more about it. But I thought I'd just have you start by also brainstorming with you. Why is it so difficult to have these difficult conversations or specific type of conversation and negotiation? So what you will do is you will, yes, thank you. On your internet-enabled device, you should be able to type in an answer, and it shows up in our word cloud, and we'll be able to see, this tells us how many people have input answers. And what's fun about this is that I can also download all these responses and share them with Angela and AVS later. So if you all wanted to analyze that further yourself. But why is it so difficult? And so we already see some answers and thoughts that you all have. It's stressful. Maybe there's rejection, very uncomfortable. There's fear, shame, awkwardness. There's all these emotions, negative sort of emotions that we tie to it. Repercussions, right? And, that there's a fear of consequences. I see that people in general aren't comfortable with conflict. They don't it's disliked. So there's anxiety around it, possible shame. One of you just added, no resolution, and you're unsure of it, unsure of how to approach it. And so it's very common, very human for us to have these thoughts and feelings. And what I'm hoping is that by the end of this hour, you'll have a couple of key tools that will help you to approach having these difficult conversations more calmly, with more skill sets so that you can have positive output without negative repercussions or having anybody be angry or, yes, ruining the relationship that, that you want to maintain. All right, so we'll come back to mentoring a little bit. So let me I will hide that a second and go back to our PowerPoint here. Hold on one second. I've got multiple windows going on. So let me get the PowerPoint back up. Okay, so many of you touched on it, difficult conversations, and then this particular type that we'll also talk about today, negotiations. You have to work with others, and those people can have different views, they can have different agendas, but we want to have these conversations because they're important to us, and we want to have some mutually beneficial agreement. Oftentimes, these difficult conversations have strong emotions, so some of you talked about that, the fact that there are different opinions, and sometimes it's high stakes too. So when any of these are involved, we will refer to that as, yes, a conflict situation. And so in this session, aiming to arm you with skills to be able to work through conflict and try to calm down strong emotions and have a respectful way of approaching different opinions. This skill set, I first learned about it almost a decade ago as I started moving up in academic administration. And I feel that it has been very, very useful as I have navigated many, many difficult conversations. Starting a year ago, I stepped into a department chair position. I now oversee 30 faculty and 4 staff members. And I was very scared about those one-on-one annual evaluations with many of whom were my peers that I'd worked with a long time ago. But I do find that this skill set, the skills that I'm talking about today, have very much helped me, not only at work, but also personally. So the key skill, this is a quote from a great book that I like, Patterson. I'll have all the references at the end of this presentation today. The key skill of effective leaders, teammates, parents, loved ones, is this capacity to skillfully address emotionally and politically risky issues, period. And so hopefully you will feel that by the end of the day, you'll be ready to approach those more strongly. Now, as Angela said, there was a link provided to you when you pre-registered. It was a link to a downloadable spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, which is, we programmed it to allow you to fill out the Dynamic Negotiation Approach Diagnostic, the DINAD, which was developed by Schneider and Dupfer. You can see the reference there. And again, I'll have that listed again at the end. If you haven't already, then I encourage you to go to this bit.ly link and download it. It'll be hard for you to complete it in real time right now, but save it for later and you can complete the survey then. But I'm hoping that several of the rest of you had a chance to complete it. Maybe can you give me some either in the chat, let me know if you had a chance. Or I don't think in webinar format we're able to do responses, but thank you. Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you. Great. So if you have that open and available, we're going to take a closer look at it right now. And I will also be pulling up mine that I have completed. So just a quick summary, you might remember that there was a series of questions. And the first series of questions asked you to rate how characteristic it is of you when this statement happens. So the example was, this was calm, so I'm playing calm music. The first question in that calm section is, when I first discover that there are differences in the conversation I'm having, then I make sure all views are out in the open, treated with equal conversation, even if there's substantial disagreement. And you're supposed to rate it on a scale of 1 to 6. Then there's a section that says, okay, now differences are persisting, the conflict feeling is growing and escalating. And now you're supposed to think about, oh, how do you respond now? Like, are you starting to close up? Are you starting to backtrack? And again, filling those out from 1 to 6. And when you finish that, you'll see 2 sets of scores. So I'm going to pull up my spreadsheet. These are the list of questions, and then you rate it from 1 to 6. And the spreadsheet automatically scores it for you. So on your second page, the second tab for score, you see your answers for when you're calm and you see your answers for when you're stormy. So for me, based on the questions, I'm answering the most of them under collaborative when I'm feeling calm. And then when I'm starting to feel tensions rise, then I'm answering them more as compromising. So we are going to go back to the mentees and share out some results so that we can have a little more interaction, have you report how you feel. So this is for calm. And if you go back to the mentee, you'll see that it'll allow you to input that. And if you all are a late joiner, then yes, feel free to go to this website, that code. I think I had copied the link before, but I can put the link again into the website. And we can kind of see that I've been collecting this data from a number of these workshops that I've been giving, because I think it's interesting. I'd like to see, like, what are the percentages of people, but almost in every time that I've given this workshop, we always have a range of, all of these have dots in them, that there are people who have preferences in all of these categories, the ones that they naturally go to. So this group looks like it's almost 50% of you are coming in at collaborative. And we'll talk more about what each of these groupings mean. So in just a few slides, but right now, just see what your responses are on the DINAD survey. But there are some of you who are in the other ones: compete, compromise, you tend to avoid, you tend to accommodate. They're all, there's no right answer. This is just how we are, right? There's diversity amongst all of us, and this is how we do. But for all of us in this session today, the strategies that we're going to talk about, I think, will be helpful for you. Okay, we've got 30 of you responding, 64 attendees. So it's fine if you don't want to log in, or you can log in later and fill these answers out. But let's go ahead and see how we're doing. Like, when we're calm, it seems like most of this group is collaborative. Some, second highest is compromising. But how about now when we go to the stormy one? So tell me now, it should appear differently on your internet-enabled device. And you can now, put in your answers for now. Your emotions are getting high. And now what do you tend to do? So many of you are like me, because as you saw when I put my results, I tend to be collaborative, or like to think that I'm collaborative when I'm first noticing differences. But when those persist and the emotions are starting to grow, I do tend to compromise. But I see that, one area that grew is avoiding, right? That's something that's a human response to be like, oh, this is getting a little tense. Maybe I'll just go grab a coffee. So good. So yeah, you can see how it has shifted a bit. And like I said, I will share this with Angela and anybody at AVS who might be interested so that you all can look at this information later. All right, that's about how many responded to the first poll. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint again so that we can continue where we were. So yes, okay, we did the mentee. And what you were seeing was the DINAD survey puts you into a type of style that you are more likely to respond to in those circumstances, when you're first calm and then when you get a little more nervous. So Schneider and Dupfer, I love how they split these on 3 axes. It's actually 2 axes. There's a level of, there's an axis of assertiveness, and there's an axis that talks about your level of empathy. And then what they talk about is that if you tended to respond in a competing manner, that tends to be a negotiation style or a conversation style when you're having conflict, where you are not showing as much empathy and you are showing higher assertiveness. Or if you happen to be more in the accommodating realm, then what that's showing is that you are responding with greater empathy and low levels of assertiveness. Everybody see how we're reading this chart. Those of you who were avoiding, in the category of avoiding, maybe that was one of your high areas, it basically indicates that you're demonstrating low levels of empathy, and assertives, you just don't want to get involved in this conflict. And those of us who had compromising, it's like middle of the way, right? We're showing a little empathy, showing a little of assertiveness. Now, what I want you to know is that all of these 5 strategies are valuable. There are times when you want to be one or the other of these. Maybe there's something like your partner asks where you want to go for dinner this evening, and you really don't care. That's a good one to just be high empathy, low assertiveness. Wherever you want, I'm going to accommodate. Or maybe there are things that are more important to you, so you're going to be more assertive about them and less empathetic. And so these strategies are good to have, and we all have them. That's why you have numbers in each of those categories. And you should think about them as different ones to pull out as, depending on the effort that you want to put in. But so I'll just say it again, that you had high scores on that DINAD survey, you would have had higher scores in certain categories. And that just means that you are more likely to use those scores when you are calm and also when you're in conflict. Thank you for that comment, Amanda. And that is an important comment. It does depend on the issue. And I maybe could have provided a little bit when we run the webinar with the survey in real time, we will often say, pick one situation and then just answer off the top of your cuff keep that same situation in mind and just answer them. Don't think about it too hard, just do your gut instinct. So it's an imperfect instrument, and you can certainly try it again, maybe to think about it different, because that's the thing, you probably will respond differently if you're thinking about where to go for dinner tonight and you don't care, versus something else that is more important to you. What I want to talk about today, though, is that in really difficult conversations that we talked about, saw that graphic in the first few slides, when there is there's conflict, there's different opinions, there's high emotions, there are high stakes. What is best if we can be working at this, in a way, the most difficult negotiation style to reach, which is on this third axis of being flexible, that it would be where you are highly empathetic, thinking about the other person's needs, but you're also highly assertive, thinking about your own needs, and you're trying to think out of the box, being as flexible as possible to find the most ideal win-win situation. So that's what we're going to spend the rest of today's session focusing on. What are these skills that can have you pull out this strategy when you're under those highest, most conflicting, stressful situations? So a lot of this comes from a very classic book by Fisher et al. And again, the references will be at the end of this talk. Principled negotiation. So it says that when you're trying to focus on basic interests that the groups have, and you want them to be mutually satisfying, and you want to be fair, that the process that we can use to do this is called principled negotiation. It's also sometimes referred to as interest-based negotiation. And there's really 4 core components to it that I hope you will, is sort of simple takeaway. And we'll go through each of these step by step. The first one is that you should focus on what we call interests, not positions. And I'll explain that one in just a few slides. That is probably the most impactful one of the 4 that I really believe is important. And I think about it all the time when I'm having difficult conversations. The second one is preparation. Preparation is very important. The third one is to try to think about brainstorming, to be flexible, think about creative options. You're trying to have mutual gain, make this be a win-win situation. And a fourth one that Fisher talks about in his book is that it's good if you can have criteria that are objective, and in a way, set that at the beginning in your mind so that you can know when you've met a good result. All right, so let's start with the first one. There's this great story, a classic case that they talk about when you take a more formal negotiations class. The classic case where there's 2 chefs and somehow they weren't really well prepared. And there's only 1 orange left in the kitchen. It's like some very important event. There are these 2 very famous dessert chefs. They're each planning to make their best dessert, but it turns out they both needed an orange, and somebody in the supply chain did not manage to order enough oranges. So there is one orange left, and both of them say, well, I need the orange. And the other one says, well, I need the orange. And so they compromise, right? That was one of those negotiation styles. And they say, fine, we'll just each cut the orange in half. And in the end, they're both disappointed because they couldn't use the whole orange, which is what was needed in their recipe. So it's just the flavor wasn't as flavorful. So this is a classic case because it indicates that the problem was here, they kept focusing on their positions, which is what they want. They wanted the orange. But what I really want to stress, the most important thing that I hope you take away today is that sometimes when you're thinking about these, not to think about what you want, but you should be focusing on why. Why do you want it? And that is what they call your interests rather than your position. The position being, I want the orange, but the interest being, well, why do I want the orange? Because it turns out in this classic case, one of the chefs wanted to use the juice of the orange, and the other chef wanted to use the orange peel. And if they could have moved beyond the what, I want the orange, to explain why, then actually they both could have met their needs successfully. So this is, as I said, the most important point I feel like I could get across to you today, that to always be thinking about this when you're in this stressful situation. Don't get locked into the what, that I absolutely have to have blank, but think about why you want to have it. And then that actually opens up a lot more of these creative options that you can, that actually you could do and have both sides of this negotiating or difficult conversation meet their needs. Okay, focus on interests, not positions. Focus on the why, not the what. So I had some ideas of different things that you all were thinking about, difficult conversations you're going to have, but I thought we'd go back to the Menti and take a little interactive break here. And so if you're just joining us, you can go to this website, enter the code if you haven't joined us yet already, and we will go back to the next slide 3, which is just to have you all put in some ideas. What is it that you recently wanted? You don't have to restrict it to negotiate, but if you have something that you're willing to share with the group that you've wanted to negotiate for recently, thank you. Or maybe you've been having a difficult conversation you've been wanting to have and you're struggling with having it. Yep. Thank you. Feel free to put those in. Salary is one I saw on the prelim questions too, but staff hiring, maybe you want to hire more staff. You would like an instrument for the research lab. You'd like to have the opportunity to work remotely, to change a product design. This is great. This is a more varied, more varied responses sometimes than I've seen in other groups. Oftentimes it's like 10, 100 people write down that they're always looking for salary. Salary is important. But this is great. I can scroll down, it keeps going. Limit to civilized benefits. Custody, oh, that's very, a personal situation. Project leadership, you'd like to maybe have an opportunity to lead the project. Working from home again is something that's very present. Getting the team to work, it's a higher work ethic, absolutely. Advancement, yes, maybe you're sharing equipment, and so how do you get priority to run your experiments on the equipment? Wearing masks, yes. Either way, either that you would like to negotiate not to, or negotiate that we do all do it. So that's great. This is helpful for me, and certainly we'll have a little bit of time, I hope, later that that we can maybe start to help each of you think about how to use these skills that we're going to go through to help you to do that. So, okay, let's go back to. Don't forget, we're going to focus on interest rather than positions. And I didn't break down all the things that you all said, whether they were interests or positions or interests. Many of them were still, I will break it out. Many of them were still positions, right? I want a higher salary. Why do you want the higher salary? It maybe because you feel like you deserve it, maybe because you're feeling that other people who you're working harder than other people and the salary is not as high as the people who are doing it. So I hope I'm just gonna use that salary one to sort of show that it's good that you know that there's this position, you want higher salary, but as you start having the difficult conversation or negotiation, to be thinking about the why and keeping that part the closest as you start on this difficult conversation, because that is really the important thing that you want to meet. And if you can meet whatever that important thing is without necessarily doing the what, then you could maybe have a more mutually. Okay, so we'll come back to that with other examples. Okay, so step number one in this most collaborative negotiation, difficult conversation is to think about why you want something. And then the second thing is to prepare. It is very much a very basic guidance, but it can help you to be much, to have data ready to support your position. So information, it is your strongest asset when you're negotiating. And so as much as you're possible, if it's a very, very, very important situation to you, then actually it's very good then for you to be spending a lot of time researching that. So for salary, that it could be like what I said, do you know what the other people in comparable positions to yours are making? Is your salary higher? Is it lower? What other data do you have? Like how many, what skill sets have you gained? What trainings, certifications have you had? And compare that more broadly. It can be hard. So I don't want to say that it's easy to get data. At my own institution, the salaries are public because I'm at a public state institution, but I know that it can be hard to see what the salaries are at different places. But as much as you can, that this will help you if you have more information. And another part of preparation is to understand what they talk about in the negotiation world as your BATNA and WATNA. So if you don't get the negotiated outcome that you want, what is your best alternative? So if you're not going to get the salary that you want at the current place, maybe your BATNA is, well, my best alternative is I've actually been wooed by this headhunter from company Y, and they're going to give me $10,000 more. So that is going to be your best alternative, or you think through it, that might be your best alternative. And then you have to think about your worst alternative. Maybe you don't have that offer from the other company. And so the worst alternative might be, I'm going to have to stay here. I'm going to be told the worst alternative is I'm going to have to stay here at the current salary that I'm at. This helps you to just have an idea of what your range is that you're going to be working with, and that you, that as you're trying to negotiate and get to the outcome that you want, that you keep this in the back of your mind. The other thing is to really know what it is for the other side, because that's, again, part of the preparation. What is their best alternative? You have to also understand why they would or would not want to accept your terms that you're trying to maybe have this negotiation or conversation about. So understanding what your BATNA is, your WATNA, and also for the other side, thank you, yes, when you're buying cars too. That's right, that this is a good strategy to be understanding and having that data, right? Looking it up in the Kelly's Blue Book Guide and things like that. Preparation, very important. The other thing that I won't go into great detail with today, but it is also to just plan everything. Like, when are you going to have this conversation? What time, what location, what, don't, if it's a very important, stressful, crucial conversation, then thinking all these details through can also be a good idea. Okay, so we've gone through two of them. And now onto the third step I want you to think about is to be thinking about creative options. Do not get locked into the interest, but think about, do not be locked into positions, think about why you want it, and then now think about creative options. So what other things could be offered that might be mutually satisfying? So perhaps it could be parking. You know, I like maybe they aren't able to give you the salary that you were hoping on, but maybe they can give you a greater travel allotment or a better parking spot, or that, you know, sort of be thinking about again, and that's why getting away from positions, getting away from the what, that it must be greater salary, and thinking about the why, because I deserve it, because I'm doing all these things. And so how do I get compensated, not necessarily by salary, but thinking outside the box. One of the things I like to talk about under this bullet is about improvisation skills. So you probably think about improvisation skills and you think comedy sketches, Saturday Night Live. But what I am a big believer on, and it's following Ellen Alda. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm not sure that with my little thing is going to come out, but okay, sorry. It's a book by Ellen Alda. There it goes. If I understood you, would I have this look on my face? It's a great book about science communication, actually, but I also feel like it's great for negotiations. The skills that people learn when they're working improv, when they're being trained to do improvisation, are actually really important skills for these difficult conversations and for communicating difficult things like our science sometimes to the laypersons. So I highly recommend that book. I didn't add it to the end of this slide deck, but the improvisation skills, there's two core things about it that I think are very helpful in negotiations. One is that in improv, they teach you never to shut the other person down. You have to always go with what they say. Like if they say, oh, yeah, I'm walking my dog. You can't say, that's not a dog. You can't say, you don't have a dog. That's shutting it down, right? You have to say, oh, yes, your dog and I have a cat, or you build on it. And so that's a very important part of negotiation too, that you try when you're having this difficult conversation, negotiation, to not shut the other person down. Don't say no, keep open, keep listening, and try to, like, you know, of course there will be limits, things that you can't accept, but don't be so rigid as to be like, that's an, you know, but keep talking, keep trying to understand. And one thing that also they teach in improv is to stay relaxed, you know, that you have no idea what's going to be thrown at you, or, you know, what questions, when you're communicating science, what questions the press might have. And one of the skills they teach is just, you got to stay relaxed, just go with the flow. Do not clench up and get all, you know, sort of making assumptions. So these things help in these difficult conversations too. Try not to say no, stay relaxed. And still not forgetting the first two bullets. Why do you want it? And that, do you have information? And the final of these 4 bullets is base it on objective criteria. Sometimes that can be hard. The text by Fisher et al. Will give more examples. So if you want to learn more about that one, like what they mean, but it tries to avoid having you just feel, or subjectively, or based on your emotions, whether you've reached a good end. So when you're calm, you can kind of think through, like, what are some criteria for us to decide whether or not we have met a mutually satisfying option, and to try to think of it objectively. Now, these all sound great, very straightforward, objective kind of things, but I will just overlay that we are negotiating and having these difficult conversations with people. And people are difficult, right? People, we have human perceptions, human emotions. And so we cannot forget that, because we might do all these other things perfectly, you know, be thinking about why I want something, not what. I have the data, I'm keeping open, trying to be creative, and I've got some criteria in mind. We could keep all that in mind, but then if human motions get in the way, it can turn everything upside down. And we saw that even in our first Mentee slide, that many of you comment on that the emotions can get in the way. So we have to address those emotions. And the way to do this is you have to understand in these conversations that the top priority is to be building trust and to build rapport. It is of utmost importance. So I'm sure some of you have thought about this and had practiced it. I thought we'd all, you know, instead of me start talking about, let's go back to the Mentee and you all can share out with me and share out with each other. So we're going to go back and go to our next. How can you demonstrate respect while you're having this difficult conversation. And I'll hide the image. It's a word cloud, I think, again. So feel free to, again, if you need the link, because some of you may have joined a little later, there's the link. This is great. I like what I'm seeing. Listen, 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 listen. Listen to the other person. Listen attentively. Stay calm. Yes, we were already talking about that, you know, in the like not tensing up, deep breaths, staying calm. Come from a place of care. That's right, that you are caring. I know you keep seeing me turn over to my screen is on the left, so that's why I keep turning to the left to see what you all are. I have two screens, that's what I'm saying. Quick to listen, slow to speak. That is a great one. Exactly. Keep your ears open and your mouth a little more slow to speak. Ask questions, remain curious, be respectful. Don't interrupt. Don't be thinking already like, okay, I'm going to argue back immediately about this. I'm not going to listen anymore. I've got my argument ready. Listen authentically, validate what they're saying. Avoid placating. This is good too, right? We'll be talking about a framework called Crucial Conversations in just a few minutes. And in that model, they talk a lot about that people think that there's a choice between being kind and being honest. And so then they placate and just be kind instead of being honest, but it's a falsehood. So yes, reiterate, that's a great one. Think about it from the other person's perspective, empathize, check there and paraphrase. Oh, some of you have already, I think, thought a lot about these things. Great job. So yes, I'll go back to my PowerPoint and we will review some of the ones that I have, which were exactly what you had also shared. Slow it down. So how to demonstrate respect. That is one way to do not rush. And so taking deep breaths, slow down. Don't feel like you need to, anything that's important. I'm in academia, and I know some of you are too, that I've talked to my faculty that when they're having important discussions like reviewing promotion and tenure, they need to not rush it. They need to make sure they leave enough time and have everybody do a thoughtful job, because when you rush people, that is when it starts, things can be more disrespectful there. So leaving enough time, slow it down. Many of you talked about this. Listen actively. So, and how do you do that? That's where you are engaged. You're asking the questions. Many of you input this into the Menti. Focus on understanding what they're saying rather than thinking about what you're going to say back immediately. Many of you, I think, talked about rephrasing it, that's a way to indicate that you're listening and like, do I hear you? Do I understand correctly that you feel this way or that this is important? One of the strategies that they'll talk about too is something called the fair fight rule. Maybe some of you do this with family members, like children. I've implemented it with my kids, where it's like, okay, fair fight rule. Each of you gets to talk for 1 minute, turning on the timer, and the other one has to listen. And then at the end of that minute, the other one has to paraphrase what they said, and then you get the minute to say your side. So try to figure out ways where if your counterparts are finding this difficult, there are actually other strategies that you can use to try to force them into listening more actively. I think the next one also some of you touched on, that it's important to use the body language and show that you are collaborating, so that you're concerned and that that you are prepared, and at the same time being honest. And that's what we're saying, not placating, but you're speaking truly and with integrity. I believe there was more on this slide or in my notes here about also that they talk about things like you can signal, like to get people very comfortable. You can say, let me see if I can summarize what you're saying, or to just, help to keep the conversation slow and make sure everybody understands what's going on. When things are starting to splinter again, trying to bring things back to a common interest, and it has to be specific and compelling and not just serving yourself, but maybe you can't decide where we're going to go for the next, this is happening in my family, where are we going to go for winter holidays? Are we going to go visit your family, or are we going to go visit my family? And so figuring out what our common interests are and not just serving myself. And this is still important because people are, there's one video I watched that talks about how people are respect radars. They can instantly tell if you are disrespecting them. So you have to be careful because everybody's antenna is out and looking for the moment that you disrespect me. Because once you disrespect me, then maybe I just want you to be afraid or fearful, or maybe I'm just going to like make you hurt or something. But so you have to keep the demonstrating respect, and that often also has to come from the tone of your voice and the words you're using. So you don't say things like, that's a ridiculous idea, because that's demonstrating disrespect. So there are things like that that are discussed. Okay. So it can be hard, right? Because sometimes, and as some of you have talked about this, what if the counterpart is that you're talking to is really a jerk, right? They are an insensitive jerk. Or maybe they are a lazy, incompetent fool. I've had all these thoughts about people that I've had difficult conversations with, and maybe you have had it too. Or they're a selfish narcissist. It is important when you're trying to have this conversation, even if they keep trying to demonstrate the things that you're like, see, that what they just did, that demonstrates that they're an insensitive jerk, or that demonstrates that they're a narcissist. For you, you remember that you want this to be a successful conversation, negotiation with a mutually beneficial outcome. And so and all we can do is control our own emotions. We can't, in a way, necessarily control other people. So as the person in control of your own emotions, this has helped me that I have to remove the judgment about the person. And so one way they talk about this in the readings is be kind to the people that you're talking with, the difficult conversation, the negotiation, but you're remaining tough on the issue. You still have your main interest that you're remaining tough on, but you're going to stay respectful and separate your judgments of the people from that person. Okay. There are two books that I highly recommend, and it seems like some of you may already have looked into some of them, and it's always good to review these. One is a book by Marshall Rosenberg. Thanks, Robin, for that comment. Yes, and I'll try to get back, because that's a very common question. What about when they're disrespectful? Yes, it can be a problem, and I'll try to come back and hit on that during the Q&A. Sometimes we can't solve that problem, but that's why I'm saying here it's that they're still acting insensitive or incompetent, and you still want to make these judgments, but it is hard. We can't control the other person. All we can do is control ourselves and just keep reminding ourselves that I want a resolution to this problem, and this is how I'm going to behave to keep trying. But we'll come back to that one. So Marshall Rosenberg has a book called Nonviolent Communication. It is amazing and wonderful. It teaches you how to have compassionate communication and also be empathetic and honest, and not just avoiding the problem, or particularly when it's a very serious one. And so he outlines a framework where you observe. So when you're wanting to start this conversation, you don't start by saying, I've noticed that you've been a lazy, incompetent fool. Instead, you need to be specific about, I noticed that yesterday you came in 10 minutes late, very specific of what you observe, rather than those judgments, rather than the interpretation of the action. You need to start with the facts that this is what happened. Then you acknowledge how that made you feel and why you might need something else. And then you request the resolution that you want. So now we're talking a little bit more about difficult conversations, maybe, rather than a specific negotiation. And you take responsibility for your part of it. Like, you don't insist that they are the only ones that have to change and make the situation better, but you're approaching it as a joint thing. The other framework that I really like, and another book that I highly recommend, is the Crucial Conversations framework by Patterson et al. And it has a lot of similarities. So if you read both of them, you can pick and choose, but they have similar things where they also say, and one of you, that was a question, what is the strategy for initiating these difficult conversations? So initiating it is this, being prepared and thinking about why you want this and why do you want it for yourself? What do you want for the others? What do you want for this relationship? Because you have to keep that in mind. They talk about bad reasons for why you want to have a conversation. Like, you can't want to have the conversation to prove you are right. Oh, I have one of those conversations in mind. I've had something that has been a relationship that has been broken, let's say, for 3 years. And the reason that I have not been able to have that difficult conversation is because I can't get past this first one. I keep coming back to the hurt feelings I have. And I'm like, I just want them to indicate that I'm right. Yeah, you can't start a good, difficult conversation to reach a mutual end if it's really for selfish intent. And so this book talks about that you actually need to clarify your own intentions of what you want, and that it's not just things like prove that I'm right. And so once you can have that mutual purpose, then you need to indicate, start the conversation of convince them that you're interested in it, have them trust your motives, make sure they show respect. And in the framework, they talk about this as being safe, that if your counterpart, like you were saying, the question, whether they start being disrespectful of you, part of the reason that they're being disrespectful is because they don't feel safe. They feel attacked. They are feeling vulnerable. So those of you who might know Brene Brown's teachings too, they're putting on the armor and being defensive. So in this conversation and in Crucial Conversations training, they teach you a lot about how to try, when you notice that they're starting to be verbally violent, or that they're starting to use body language, or they're being silent and they're just glaring at you. I don't have the time to go into all of those right now, but I recommend that you get that, because it talks more about strategies of how to pull people out of that by making them feel safer. Things like saying, I see that you're not wanting to get, trying to contrast for them that I don't mean to make you feel bad. I don't mean to disrespect you, bringing them back to the mutual purpose. I'm trying to blank, 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 figure out where we're going to go on a mutually satisfying holiday this winter. So their framework also talks about state. So it's similar to the one that nonviolent communications talked about, right? Start with facts, not how you feel, but facts. This is what I noticed. Then tell the story of what that makes you think. Ask for their story, talk tentatively, encourage testing. So let me give you an example. Here's the state the facts. I read this email about our meeting. That was a fact. I read it, there was an email. And then the story. I thought we reached consensus at the meeting, but this email seemed like you were trying to bypass what we decided. That's my story, it's how I'm feeling. And then ask them, can you help me to understand your intent? What was it that you were trying to accomplish? In my opinion, I'm wondering if, so the nice thing about the Crucial Conversations is that they give you a lot of these phrases to try to frame the conversation, because it can be hard to do this in the moment. Let me be clear. I continue to practice that all the time. Yes, I'll go. Thank you, Sarah. I continue to practice all the time. And I actually have a worksheet. Crucial Conversations will have a worksheet for you to even plan out your most difficult conversations. And they'll have all these sections, like what are the facts? Talk about your story, ask for this, so that you can try to be controlled and not be in the whirlwind of emotion at the time. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. Sorry, we'll have this time. So then the last one is, after talking tentatively, then, keep encouraging, maintaining this open. I want to hear your views. I know they might be different from mine. Maybe I'm missing something. I really want us to be able to work together. So maintaining that respect. Then if you notice that they're starting to get disrespectful, maybe come back and contrast and say, no, that's not what I mean. My goal is that, I want to have a good, healthy working relationship. It is not easy. Maybe it sounds, I don't want to make it sound like you're like, oh, it's so easy, just like have all these phrases, and it's not. But if this is a really important, difficult conversation, important negotiation, this is the skill sets that I think, as we develop them and keep practicing, it can make a huge impact. So here's a case study, but I can see that I am running out of time. So, so I'm gonna maybe skip this, though we can go more into Q&A, but one of you had asked in the preliminary questions about somebody who isn't pulling their weight in the office, right? Or in the maybe the lab, the research facility, or at work. And this was an example about that, this was an example of a manufacturing team member who's a total slacker, takes frequent breaks, and Kelly's always looking for other things. I have to fill in, this is getting old. And so if we had time, I would have had you brainstorm yourself for a few minutes as to how would you start this conversation. But let me just go ahead and take you through this example, that you start with that mutual purpose and mutual respect. Hey, what was her name? Kelly. Hey, Kelly, I don't think we want to lecture if the team doesn't meet our goals. And so as a team member, you have as much voice on this as all of the rest of us and in how we achieve this. And then here's the fact. I noticed you taking breaks or being otherwise occupied while the team is falling behind. Not arguable, right? It's not that I noticed you being lazy. Like, it's the fact. What specific action was happening? And then my story, in the past, I stepped up to, cover and make sure we meet the goals, but I'm kind of worn out. I can't continue doing this. Is there something going on in your world that's keeping you from focusing? So you're asking for their story because something's going on and you maybe don't have all the information in your pool of knowledge. Are you concerned about the manager saying we're going to miss the goals? What can we do to meet them together? Again, I understand if this is among the first times you see this, it looks too easy. It takes practice though, and effort. And if we'd had time for you to work on it, you would start feeling like, oh, what is the right answer? And there's multiple answers. These aren't, this is not the only way to have gone that conversation. So these are some that you had, like that you were expecting: negotiating salary increase, communicating with the team member about their quantity or quality of work, like maybe keeping an area clean. This one's a personal example, right? Lately, particularly with the COVID pandemic, are you going to gather with extended family? I just went to a family wedding in Minneapolis, and they said that consumed their worries over the past year about to meet for a wedding or not. They had 250 persons at the wedding, and the difficulties associated with that. So I see that question. I'll come back to that, Peter. Thank you. So I do want to leave time for questions. So I think if I had more time, we could have gone through an exercise where, we could go through this. And I still encourage you to be practicing this, look at the webinar recording, come back and maybe start framing how you might address these. And I will just remind you, remember that we're focusing on why we want it, not the what. Be prepared, be ready to brainstorm, base your decisions on objective criteria. Don't forget everybody's human. And so because they're human, make sure you have the trust, the rapport, maintain respect. Don't think of the person, focus on the problem, and then practice these nonviolent communication skills and the crucial conversations framework. So here's a list of the references. And like I said, I will make this available to Angela and AVS. And so hopefully they will share this out with you. And I thank you so much for your time. And I didn't leave the 15 minutes, sorry, Angela, but we'll leave some time now for questions and answers. So thank you. Shall I go directly into those, Angela?
Yeah, I have a question that was submitted in advance. So someone had submitted that, what if you've been working in a toxic environment for a long time, and then you decide to resolve the issue at some point, and then the person asks, well, why didn't you speak up before? So how would you handle that?
Yes, and I just want to say this is all very subjective stuff. There's no right or wrong answer, but my gut instinct would have been, you know what, it is scary and we are human and I have fears just like you do. And so I was too scared, but now, I've maybe learned some strategies and I'm bringing it up now because it can't go on any further. So I'll go back to the Brene Brown, that I definitely believe what Brene talks about, that shaming or blaming, like, why didn't you do this? Or like, like, this is a problem. Why didn't you support? That's not helpful, actually. In these situations where we are going to resolve and have a good positive resolution, it is just great that the person ended up being brave enough to bring it up at the time that they were ready. So yes, we can look back and say, but I would say it's not a valuable exercise to do that, but rather let's just deep breaths, move forward. That's what I would have said.
And we have another question that came in. And what if team members admit that they're lazy already and use it as a running joke, and then management does not have any repercussions? So how would you handle that?
Yeah. So there are people who will joke about things. And I think that's why, so then the little bubble is that, they're just a little jokester and trying to get. So I think finding a time to have this crucial conversation, and when they joke about it, to not get upset, but like, so that framework, I'll go back to it because I feel like this framework can help to set the stage. Like, they might want to joke about it and keep going, but if you can find some time when it's not just passing in the hallway, but maybe say, like, I've been wanting to talk to you about something, can I come meet with you Thursday at 5 again? Like, that's what I was saying, like, set the time, location. Don't do it somewhere where they can get away from the conversation with just like, oh, it's a joke, I'm lazy, and then keep walking. It's a defense mechanism that they're doing that, right? So you have to get beyond that and try to get to the, okay, maybe, it doesn't matter if you're not, but there are actual behaviors that I'm noticing. And I think these behaviors can change. So lazy is a judgment, right? That's why they're saying you have to share the fact, or in the nonviolent one, you have to find a specific instance, because maybe you can change that instance, right? That you're not putting the tools back after you finish using them. That specific instance makes me feel like you think we're, that I have my time's less valuable because I have to do all the cleanup. Is that what you intend? And, why are you having problems doing this action that I'm perceiving to be lazy? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, you're trying to get more specific and change that specific behavior, and rather than you're lazy or you're a jerk, because that, you're right, trying to fix that is hard, but trying to have them understand how a specific behavior is impacting your team would be great. Sorry. Let's see. I'm going to go back to Peter's too about, you state the facts and they refuse to acknowledge them. Yeah. So this is always the problem, that you can't control the other person. They refuse to acknowledge them. It kind of depends on like what the facts are. Like, you could document it even more strongly, right? Like the meeting minutes or this, or it's hard to know without thinking about the exact situation you're in. But that is why we start with facts instead of judgment, because judgments are subjective. Like, you say that I'm running the meeting badly. That's pretty subjective. Can you be very specific about why I'm running the meeting badly? There is no agenda. There is, like, you set that it's 10 minutes, but you let it go 20 minutes long. So finding the facts to try to support it. And that's, if they do refuse, it is hard. And that's another common question. I know some of you had it. How do you, if they're aggressive, if they get angry, that's kind of what we were talking about. Like, you have to go back to safety, trying to get them to feel safe again, because they are, if they are not feeling safe, that is why they're getting aggressive again. And I'm sorry that I can't go into a great deal of details. I do recommend Crucial Conversations actually has a training session in person and online, and they have all kinds of various options where they'll go through like I think it's a 15-hour, you could do it as short on your own time, but it's a great thing. 1 minute left. Sorry, Miguel, you said, can I go back to the conversation? Yes, okay. Maybe, was it this one? This one, maybe. What do you think, Angela? Should should I try to fit one more in?
Yes, that's fine. I'm sorry.
That's
yes.
Okay. One more in that oh, next slide. Yep. People also worry about supervisors, right? That's, you know, it's difficult to talk to somebody who has greater power. That happens a lot in academia. Like I see this all the time. For a while, I was associate dean of graduate programs, and the power differential between graduate students and faculty, and how do we, or faculty department chairs or faculty and deans, you know, like that power differential it does always make it difficult. And maybe the counterpart is not trained in all these skills, but you can still take ownership of your part of it, that we're all still human. And like I said, respect radars. So maintaining respect, making sure that they understand where you're coming from, that this isn't just self-serving, that they can be mutually beneficial. That's an important part. Okay, 1 minute over.
All right, well, thank you everyone for attending today's session. Lily, I'm going to take the screen back. And thank you everyone for attending today's session. I mean, this was really a great session for us. And thank you, Lily. You gave us a lot of important information and a lot of things to think about. So that's been great. Remember to review the AVS website for upcoming events. And in particular, please note that Lily will be leading a session for us at the AVS 68th International Symposium and Exhibition this November in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on the topic of work-life balance. So please review the AVS website for additional information. Please take a few moments to complete the survey at the end of the session. Your feedback is important and appreciated. And thank you everyone for joining, and especially thank you to Lily.